Well, Broadway fans, he is bringing one of the most iconic characters of Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird to life in Aaron Sorkin's new adaptation on Broadway. Gideon Glick joining me here. I'm Sam Eckmann for Gold Derby. Gideon, you're playing Dill from To Kill a Mockingbird, and this show had a huge workshop process before it got to Broadway for a long time. Can you sort of describe what that process was like and what those first readings were like?
Yeah, so we did there was two readings before I became involved they were like 2-day readings. And that's when Celia and Will first started with it. And at that point, it wasn't about adults playing kids. They just wanted to hear it. And then after that reading, they said, oh, okay, this is what we're going to do. And then they did, I think a month later, a 3-week workshop. And that's when I came on. And that was kind of exploring what the show would be like on its feet and giving the creative team some semblance as to what it could visually look like and how the text would feel mounted, because on the page it's very, very different than what you see at the end of the day. And that kind of gave us a good semblance as to what it could be. And so we staged most of it in that first workshop. And then I got the part during that workshop, which was also very exciting. And then the second workshop was more about fine-tuning parts that we felt needed work and could evolve a little bit more. And that was more about the text rather than what it was on its feet.
Yeah. And Aaron Sorkin seems like, he's someone who's very exacting with his words. How different is this final script on Broadway from those early versions?
That's a good question. I would say parts of it shifted. There's some parts that remain completely intact, but the preview process was actually quite long. We did, I think, was it 6 weeks? Or I think it might have been 6 weeks, which is really crazy. And we edited a lot. I think we cut about 20 minutes off the show, and we just shaved a lot and added a little bit, but it was mostly about shaving. And Aaron was very amenable to the whole thing.
Yeah. And I wanted to talk about, because you are an adult and you are playing a child in this show, along with Celia Keenan-Bolger as Scout and Will Pullen as Jim. And I think that's something like I didn't know how to feel about that at first before I saw it. I was like, wait, they're doing what? They're playing kids? But you go and it really works. And you all three kind of are the narrators of the piece. What kind of parameters or guidelines did like Bart Sher, the director, give to you for that?
Yeah, it wasn't so prescriptive. I think we all kind of were trying to figure it out together collectively. What I think was important, and then we were all on the same page about, is that we weren't really concerned with the external aspects of presenting a child in terms of the way they use their body and the way their voice is. That kind of follows suit when you're concerned with the stakes and why a character is saying what they're saying. And for instance, with the children, they're in the Deep South in the 1930s. There's no television. What excites them? What ignites them? What makes them run around? What makes them say the things they say? Because they don't have any entertainment where they can sit back and just watch. So they are their own form of entertainment. So when we understood the stakes and the setting, everything else just follows suit.
Yeah. And it was nice because it keeps, I think, that childlike vision of the adult world from the novel intact. Did you have a relationship with the book as a kid?
Yeah, I read the book in the 7th grade, and for me it was a really transformative experience, as it was how I learned how to be a critical reader and a critical thinker. It's how I sussed out theme and metaphor and simile and all that fun stuff. And I kind of carry that with me when I read any book, because that really was the marker for how to read. So it meant a lot to me as a critical thinker. Obviously, the themes were very important too, but when I've reread it over the years, the themes became even more and more important, and especially as we've been mounting this, just how relevant it still is, and how good the book is. The book is really, the hype is real. It's an extraordinary book. She was an extraordinary author.
Yeah. And Dill seems to me like, when I saw the show, one of the most expanded characters from the book. Was it useful to you in that sense to pull from the novel, or did you just focus on the script when creating your character?
It was an amalgamation of sorts. There was the book, there was the script. He's based off Truman Capote, so I did a lot of research on Capote and his life and his work. There's a book that he published in 1948 called Other Voices, Other Rooms, and the protagonist is named Joel Knox, who is this 13-year-old queer boy in the Deep South, and it's kind of this Southern Gothic, strange, eerie setting, and it's somewhat semi-autobiographical, and that to me was really an amazing jumping off point, because for me it felt like here is this kind of strange setting that I feel Dill comes from. I wanted Dill to feel like he comes from a very different world, because he's a visitor. He's the outsider, and so for me that was really instrumental when we were kind of figuring out who Dill was.
And I think it's so cool to imagine these writers like Truman Capote and Harper Lee basing characters off each other and their friends. What for you, because he was the basis of that character, do you view Dill as a queer character?
Oh, 100%. 100%. I mean, he's mentioned as queer, and not in the gay sense in the book, but I think they're alluding to it, that how strange he is, the way he speaks, the way he dresses, how odd he is against everybody else. I think it's all coded words. What I find kind of insane about the book is that it's a book about empathy and otherness, and yet you have this queer character who is based off Truman Capote. So we know for a fact it is a young queer boy, and it's not taught. I wasn't taught that in school, and so for me and Aaron too, and kind of all of us when we were mounting this, I think it was very important to highlight that, because it's actually quite modern, and it's almost a radical thing that it existed back then. Part of me feels like it's a radical queer novel, especially Harper Lee is there was allusion that she was a lesbian, and her character Scout is a tomboy and tough, and these are characters you don't see quite often, and yet it's one of the most read books in the nation.
Yeah, and is there something then about, because you're not playing Truman Capote obviously, but is there something about him that you feel you really latched onto that is incorporated into Dill?
Yeah, there's a couple things. I would say the courageousness of Capote. Capote already in 1948, when he published Other Voices, Other Rooms, he was a queer author. There's a picture of him in the book, in the book jacket, that was apparently very provocative for the time. And the fact that he lived his life so in your face, and at a time where that was not acceptable. And so I bring that to make him to this character who doesn't. He's really an anomaly, and he's not unapologetic about who he is. I bring that with me, and then also this self-mythologizing character. Capote created this myth about him and these stories, and that's a lot about Dill. For Dill, it's a coping mechanism. It's a way to mask this cruel upbringing that he's been a part of, but I think it's the same for Capote. He had the same life. He had a mother who locked him in a room, who went to meet men, and was always told how too much he was. So yeah, that's deeply infused in this interpretation.
And you've had several successful queer roles on Broadway that have been a huge part of your career, from Spring Awakening and Significant Other. Do you sort of search those out, or do they find you?
I think it's a little bit of both. I feel very fortunate that I've been able to play an eclectic variety of queer characters, and to play queer characters who are well-rounded and who aren't these stock kind of quippy best friends and who have dimension to them, and that was always very important to me in picking my roles, and that the jokes are not about their sexuality. That was never an interest of mine.
Mm-hmm. And I think with Dill, one of the other things that makes him so compelling and ultimately kind of heartbreaking to watch is you really see this kid come to the realization of how unjust the world is around him. And I mean, he even challenges some of Atticus's beliefs about civility. And I'm curious, what kind of conversations were there about that in the creative process?
Yeah, well, I realized, when we created this version, the court case is really the centerpiece, and Atticus is much more the protagonist of this version, and the book has the book is about the loss of innocence as well, and what I realized, especially in the first act, all my scenes are about adventure. They're about Radley. They're about the voodoo dolls. So I realized how important that was, because that was evocative of youth, and it had nothing to do with the trial or challenging Atticus. So I realized how important that was in the structure of the first act. And then the second act, when so then Dill becomes almost a symbol of innocence and childhood. And so then the second act is the assembling of that. And in terms of his recognition of the injustice of Tom Robinson, and then his admission of the cruelty that he has faced in his own life. And so you get to see both sides. And I think it's really important that the first act, how strong that is, because then I think the impact of the second act is even more so.
Yeah, and you have lots of great moments along the way with Jeff Daniels, and on stage he has such a calming, grounded presence as Atticus. What is it like working with him?
I mean, he's a consummate actor. He's a real actor's actor. He doesn't phone it in. He works so hard, and it's inspiring. Whenever we were on breaks, he just went right back to the script. It was important that he knew his lines very, very early on, and he was always marking, making notes constantly. And it's inspiring to see someone at the top of his game and in his 60s who's been doing it for so long, and to see how good his craft is.
Yeah. And this show is a huge sold-out hit every night. And you made your Broadway debut in another sold-out major hit, Spring Awakening. And you were only a teenager in that process. I think you began it when you were a senior in high school, if I remember correctly. So what is it like to experience a show like that now as an adult?
That's a good question. I think it's good to have perspective. I will say, when I did Spring Awakening, I was young, I was antsy. I was the first to leave. I went to go to college. I majored in art history. I went to do another play. I was eager to leave, just because I was young, but I also didn't really understand how good it was, how good we had it. I understood how good the show was, but to have a show that is artistically sound and also commercially successful is so rare. And I don't think I understood that back then. Now I do. And so I'm relishing it a whole lot more. I think that comes with age. You understand what is an anomaly and what isn't. I think there was maybe a cockiness, a youthful cockiness, that of course that will come around again. And it doesn't come around as often as you would like. And so I've learned to, I think actors get very tired. It's an 8-show week. It's hard. Mm-hmm. And also as an actor, you're not used to routine in any way. That's the lifestyle, is that it's such a roller coaster. So finally you get routine and you're kind of confused and you don't understand why you're doing the same thing every day. And so it's been important to me to really electrify that and charge it up and not get complacent in my work and in the experience, and not take it for granted in any way.
Yeah. And, as we leave off here, To Kill a Mockingbird, it remains such a timely piece of literature and of theater. The themes are still so relevant today. What kind of conversations do you hope happen after people leave the theater?
I hope people see the relevance. I hope people, first of all, have a profound experience at the show. I hope it's exhilarating for them. I hope it's inspiring. But I hope people really understand that the work is not done. We live in trying, scary times, and that this adaptation has highlighted what is still very relevant in the book. The book was in the 60s, looking back on the 30s, and yet those were still two time periods that it was still relevant. And now we're in 2019, and it's still very relevant. And I think that is really important, that we know that the work is not done. There is, our nation is not rectified its really racist past and its racist present. And it needs to, we need to do the work.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great place to end this conversation with. Let's go do some work.
All right.
Thanks so much for sitting down with me, Gideon, and best of luck. Continue to break a leg with the rest of your run in the show.
Thanks, Sam.